Well, as we said at the beginning, within weeks, the International Atomic Energy Agency, maybe days, and India may conclude safeguard agreements to govern this additional set of civilian facilities that India has agreed under this arrangement to put under international safeguards. That would just be a portion of their total nuclear energy sector. The IAEA and India are negotiating this agreement now. The negotiations have been going on since November. This could be concluded this month. If they do, then the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors, which meets next on March 3rd, could be asked to approve this agreement, which, as I'll describe in a second, is an unusual safeguards agreement. If the Board of Governors approves it, then the 45-member nuclear suppliers group will then be asked by the United States and France and Russia, other nuclear suppliers who want to sell to India, to consider the U.S. proposal for exempting India from the nuclear supplier group rule that says that NSG states shall only supply countries that have full scope safeguards, comprehensive IAEA safeguards over all, not just some of the facilities. So that is why, in my view and the view of many others, it's important for Congress to take a look at this, because, as Sharon said at the outset, if the nuclear supplier group guideline change is a so-called clean exemption for India, and it does not contain at least the same restrictions and conditions that Congress included in the Henry Hyde Act of 2006 on nuclear testing and transfer of sensitive process enrichment technology, then other nuclear supplier states are going to be operating vis-a-vis India by a different set of standards than the United States. And what's wrong with that? Well, two basic reasons. One is, if you are General Electric and you want to sell your nuclear reactor to India, the Indians are going to say, well, why should we buy from General Electric when we could go buy from Areva, French company, which doesn't have to live by the same restrictions as General Electric. So U.S. firms are going to be at a competitive disadvantage, to say the least. The other reason, and I think this is far more important, is that all that Congress did to try to protect the nuclear non-proliferation policies of the U.S. and the global system, which I don't think were enough in the INAC, Act, but they were something, those will have been made irrelevant because other states are not going to have to live by the same standards. So let me just describe what is at stake at the nuclear suppliers group. And before I go through a list of about 4 key issues, I want to point out one of the documents that was on the table, which is the current U.S. proposal for changing NSG rules. It looks like this. This was, it still looks the same. It's dated March of 2006. This was circulated in March 2006 by the U.S. This is a pre-decisional draft. And if you take a look at it, you'll see that essentially what it does in the operative sentence, which is in the last paragraph, that the guideline would allow individual nuclear supplier group states to judge whether India is meeting the commitments it made back in July 2005, and whether they will or will not continue to engage in nuclear trade if India violates those commitments, safeguards, nuclear testing, etc. So in other words, this U.S. proposal, which is now the one that's on the table and may be revised, in my view, is entirely inconsistent with the Hyde Act. So before I get to some of those specifics, let me also just point out some problems with the safeguards agreement, which is, as I said, under negotiation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. India is seeking unprecedented India-specific safeguards over these additional facilities that it's declared as civilian. Now, we don't know very much about the details of these negotiations, but there are a number of press reports about what the key issues are, and some of my sources tell me that there are 2 key issues that they're grappling with. India wants these safeguards agreements to guarantee nuclear fuel supplies for India, an IAEA-backed fuel supply guarantee. Now, why does India want this guarantee from the agency? Well, India knows that if they conduct a nuclear test, some states are not going to want to continue to provide nuclear fuel supplies. So they want a guarantee from the agency. The agency has big problems with this. As a matter of principle, if you're going to provide fuel supply guarantees, you want to do so in a manner that ensures that the states receiving the supplies are complying with basic non-proliferation standards. In addition, India in 2005, when Bush and Singh announced this, it pledged to negotiate an additional protocol to its safeguards agreements. Now, the additional protocol provides, in the case of non-nuclear weapon states, the IAEA, additional powers of inspection and investigation. This is particularly important with respect to Iran. It essentially allows the agency access to information that has not been declared or facilities that have not been officially declared by the host country. In the case of India, this is quite interesting because India, of course, has an unsafeguarded nuclear weapons program. So an additional protocol in the case of India, on the one hand, you could say, well, this is not going to be very meaningful if it just applies to the civilian facilities under safeguards. It could be very meaningful if it has some application to its nuclear weapons program, which is a possible transfer of technologies from other countries that it could use in nuclear weapons production. Well, India and the agency have not begun the process of negotiating this additional safeguards agreement. The Hyde Act says that before Congress sees the 123, formally considers the 123 agreement, the agency and the Indian government must make substantial progress on the additional protocol, whatever that means. Third key issue, the U.S. Guideline that has been put forward to the NSG would, as I said, allow individual states to continue to provide India with nuclear fuel supplies, even if New Delhi breaks its nuclear test moratorium pledge. In the view of my organization and many other experts, the NSG should not write its guidelines in the way the U.S. has proposed, but rather, if it is going to make an exception for India, they should be clear that the exemption for India is revoked automatically, without question, if India conducts a nuclear test explosion. That needs to be written into the guideline.